Howdy folks, welcome to this lecture on legal aspects of pre-hospital care. So here are some topics we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about morals, ethics, law, what scope of practice means, what the standard of care means, what negligence means, what is abandonment, and what is consent. So morals are the rules or habits of conduct concerned with the discernment of what is right and wrong. These morals are something that's individual. The morals are going to be based on things like how you're brought up, if you subscribe to a particular religion, and what you believe is right and wrong. Ethics, the definition, a body of principles of good conduct, or any set of moral principles or values. This is set by a group. And ultimately, the ethics are going to be based on somebody's individual morals. So again, this is going to be sort of reference to how you grow up. Is going to help you decide what is ethical and what is appropriate. Ethical responsibilities. So our ethical responsibilities as EMTs, we want to make the patient's needs a priority. Essentially, this is a job of service. We're here to serve others. We're not here to serve ourselves. We're not here to serve our own needs. And that's why it's important for us to subordinate our own needs to the patient's. Our patient's needs are our priority. Part of that is maintaining our skills and knowledge. If we don't keep up on our skills, if we let those kind of go by the wayside, when we have to perform a skill, we may not do it so well, and we could end up harming a patient. We want to keep our knowledge up to date. Medicine changes on a regular basis. We have to keep up with the changes. We have to critically review our performance. And this is something we'll get practice with, is reviewing what did I do well and what do I need to improve on. What do I need to improve on? And we got to be honest with ourselves. Sometimes it's really truly difficult to critically review ourselves. We have to be honest and review our performance, review what was good and what needs improvement. So we have an EMT Code of Ethics, which is sort of our statement to the public. It was written by a guy named Charles Gillespie. He's a doctor, and was adopted by the National Association of Emergency Medical Technicians in 1978. Let's see, I've gone ahead and pulled this up for you right here. So this is our Code of Ethics for EMS practitioners: to conserve life, alleviate suffering, promote health, do no harm, and encourage the quality and equal availability of emergency medical care. You can take and read through this. The address is up here, naemt.org, About Us, and emtoath.aspx. You can also get here by going to naemt.org, and you go to About Us here, and the EMT Oath and Code of Ethics. So you can check that out. The next thing I'll talk about is law. So there are different types of law. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this at all. There's constitutional law. That comes from the Constitution. Legislative law, executive law, judicial law, and administrative law. This defines what is legal. Administrative law is going to be the law that generally pertains to EMS, but not always. There can be some constitutional type law that could end up applying to EMS if there's concerns with discrimination and that sort of thing. That's where the constitutional law comes in. Our Texas laws of interest, we have the Health and Safety Code, the Traffic Code, detention of mentally ill individuals, that's going to come into play. The DSHS administrative rules, so this is basically what says you can be certified, how you can get recertified, and what happens if there's any disciplinary action. Next thing to talk about is the scope of practice. This defines the care that providers are allowed to give to the patient. It also determines the different levels of provider. Most states have very specific lists of things you are allowed to do. So basically they have the allowed lists. Whoops. In Texas, there's no defined scope of practice. So what does that mean? Okay, so if you go to Maryland, Maryland is a state that has a very specific defined scope of practice. What that means is that if they are, regardless of where they are in the state and regardless of who the medical director is for the system, every patient is allowed to receive the same set of skills. That's different in the state of Texas. In the state of Texas, the medical director determines what you do. The medical director in perhaps West Texas, where there are not many ambulances, there aren't many EMS providers. They may say that EMTs are allowed to put advanced airways in. They may give advanced EMTs the opportunity to give different drugs that wouldn't normally be considered advanced EMT drugs. They may teach paramedics how to do sutures, how to sew people up. That is something that you wouldn't be able to do in Maryland because the state defines exactly what EMS providers are allowed to do. This becomes significant when you are in kind of crisis type situations. There was a case many years ago now about a paramedic crew who was out somewhere probably about 45 to an hour away from a hospital, and they had a woman who was obviously very pregnant. She was in traumatic cardiac arrest. The patient had just gone into cardiac arrest. The patient's husband was on scene. The paramedics called the hospital and asked, "What do we do?" The doctor walked them through an emergency C-section on the mom. I don't know what the outcomes were for the patients. I'm pretty sure the mom died. I don't know what happened to the baby. But the husband consented on behalf of the wife to do the emergency C-section. The doctors walked him through it, and those two paramedics lost their license because it was outside of their scope of practice. So that's one of the drawbacks of having a very specific scope of practice, is if something does come up, you don't have the ability to necessarily do what the doctors are telling you to do. In Texas, however, there is no defined scope of practice. Doctors, whoever is the medical director, determines what your scope of practice is. So like I said, the scope of practice is established by the medical director for your system. The Texas Medical Practice Act allows physicians to delegate procedures to EMS personnel. And there are three ways you can do this. You can have a protocol, you can have a standing order, and you can have online medical control. A protocol is a specific set of instructions. So if your patient is complaining of chest pain, I'll abbreviate that CP. You are going to give aspirin, which is abbreviated ASA. You're going to give nitroglycerin, which is abbreviated NTG. We use a lot of abbreviations. You don't need to worry with the abbreviations just yet. Anyway, you give this medication, you give this medication. A standing order is the specific, you can give this medication for this complaint. The protocol is the whole thing. So you're going to give aspirin, you'll give nitroglycerin, you'll put your patient on the stretcher, you will transport. That whole document that tells you what to do is your protocol, and the standing order is the very specific intervention like aspirin or put them on the cot. You can also do online medical control. So this is where you get on the phone, so you make a phone call and talk to a doc. Be sure to be familiar with the differences between a protocol, a standing order, and online medical control. Sometimes I'll abbreviate this OLMC for online medical control.